Right. Thank you. So first I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me and you for attending my paper. I hate beginning like Slavoj Žižek, but I hope this is not a huge misunderstanding, because I'm a little embarrassed because the topics I'm going to present you is not the topics I'm working as a researcher. I am a philosopher, and this is a book dealing with history. It's a German book published this year in April, actually, by two German researchers. It's Soldaten Protokolle von Kämpfen, Töten und Sterben, and it's a very interesting thing from historical as well as from other perspectives. I read it because of intellectual curiosity and because I think I can find something on the material, for material that I work on: social bonds, social links, mutations, etc. So I hope I will not give too many general conclusions from the material, and that there will be some time for a discussion. I hope I will finish presentation in a half an hour, I hope. The interesting thing about this material is, first, that it concerns one of the most explored and researched time in the human history. The material is so overwhelming and huge that even professional historians dealing with the Second World War find it difficult to keep track of the literature on one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. The monumental Germany and the Second World War was published in 10 volumes, for instance. Every battle in Second World War has a fixed place in the historical narrative, as it does, of course, the horrible violence that left 60 million dead around the world, including the suffering of the civilian population, the murder of the Jews, and the partisan war in East and, of course, in Yugoslavia. The evidence comes from recorded conversations between prisoners of war in backed cells. That's the interesting thing. These are not fictions, these are not confessions, these are actual transcriptions of the talk between German officers and soldiers. The British had special camps near London for prisoners from Germany and Italy. So between September 39 and October 45, more than 13,000 German prisoners were transferred for closer observation to special facilities that the Allies had initially established in England at the Trent Park. The purpose of the special camps was to extract military secrets from the soldiers. The Allies hoped to win information that would give them a strategic advantage. In addition to the cells being bugged with hidden microphones, only 2 cases are reported that the prisoners were suspecting something and they were quickly transferred elsewhere. A number of informers were planted among the prisoners whose assignment was to guide the conversation in the desired direction. So most of the prisoners were not aware that they were being spied on. The archive is huge. There are more than 150,000 pages of these conversations. So there are at least 120,000 hours of conversations on everything you can imagine. So here one should proceed very carefully. These are transcripts of men talking with men. In other words, these are all soldiers. Not only soldiers, also top generals from the German army. There are Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, Rommel's successor in North Africa, Hans Kramer, Ludwig Krüvel, William Thoma, all Africa Corps commanders, Dietrich von Scholzitz, the German commander in Paris, Heinrich Eberbach, the commander of German tank forces in Western France, and Kurt Meyer, he appears numerously, commander of Waffen-SS Division. So there are diversity of voices, diversity of perspectives. The bugged prisoners included soldiers from almost every part of the military, from combat swimmers in a naval unit to a general. The material also covers astonishingly wide of operational areas. Almost all the prisoners who ended up in the special camps were captured on the Western Front or in Africa. and unfortunately for us, there are no informations of Yugoslavia fightings. And this is one of the dark spots of the authors, because they say the Balkans is not included. The Balkan, as we all know, is the ideological concept, meaning what? So, one of the obstacles reading this is to find out who is talking, from which perspective. One is general, one has such, well, it's difficult to judge. So I did some research, but not too deeply. The problem is also that there are the diversity of the voices because there are soldiers from different branches of the military. There are Marines, there are war pilots, there are, I don't know, everybody. The conversations show very different attitudes toward fighting and dying. The aim of the conversation, one should not forget to also, the aim of the conversation is just to do something interesting, to strengthen bonds and links with colleagues, Kameradschaft. So this is a further obstacle because, you know, when there are hints of disagreement, the topics is usually abandoned and there are no fights or quarrels, etc. It would be very interesting to go through how prisoners change morals between the whole Second World War, during the Second World War. Generally, one can say, as the war progressed, they increasingly cited people's lack of ability to criticize Hitler. But this critique of Hitler is very interesting because it's always in a disguised fashion. There are rare direct critique of Hitler. These critics are, you'll see if we'll have time, I think this is the interesting thing. Blaming the others for the defeat, Hitler is not himself responsible, the poor guy. Usually the system is to be blamed. There are theories that Hitler was literally changed by an actor. Chaplin would be pleased. There are cases when people are asking questions, I did not see it, and Louis began today's session with it, and there are very interesting things when somebody says, how didn't I see it in 33? How didn't I see it in 41, etc., etc. So the major contribution of this book, I would say, is to show that the German regular forces, Wehrmacht, was heavily involved in war crimes. This is the myth, despite the research. This is the myth that still persists. You wouldn't believe it, but it still persists. A couple of years ago, 12 years ago, or 14, there was an exhibition in Germany who traveled from a city to a city in Germany, war or extermination, the crimes of the Wehrmacht, and there was a steer public debate, and there was very repulsive reactions. There were some specialists showing how this is a blamage because some pictures was not in regular order, etc. The details that are horrified sometimes are really brutal, really horrifying details and mentions, and these are war crimes against civilians, partisans, soldiers. There is talk about rape, genocide, etc. I put my title, which is a little provocative and a little misleading, in their own words, that was fun. What I want, and I think this is the beauty of the material, that you don't have very similar responses to the same situation. They are very different voices, so actually one can say that personal responsibility is a great factor. So you have cases where, you know, an officer stood up and risks his life because he didn't want to obey a command to shoot dead, to kill every commissar on the Russian front. You know, at the beginning of the Russian front, commissars were first killed, every soldier was killed. This is not something new, you know, because also allies in Normandy didn't take war prisoners. So it's very difficult to measure the brutality of the war, and you'll see from the transcripts, I hope. 10 minutes already. So, one can say, judging from the brutality, that in German army, of course, they were all fanatics and sadists. Sadly, no. The research showed that it was a regular army and regular men population, because there were only 5% of sadists in a strict term of the world. And this is the percentage of the populations whose sociopathic tendencies are kept in check during peacetime by the street punishment. Interesting thing is that 18 million Germans went through the army, 1 million ended as war prisoners. And from my perspective, these transcripts also show that the thesis proposed by Hannah Arendt on the banality of evil is on very shaky grounds, because it's too simplifying and too generalizing. Almost nobody said, I just obeyed the orders. You'll see, there's also one case of the general von Breuch who says, yes, after the war, everybody will say, yeah, I just obeyed the orders. Exactly what Eichmann, as you know, did at the war tribunal on his, yeah. What is interesting also is that for these soldiers, war is not over. Till the end, war is not over. As soldiers, they are respecting hierarchy strictly, and they kept their military values. What is striking is that common practice of torture and rape, subsequent killings of partisans in the Soviet Union, members of the resistance, were generally not perceived as problematic. There are exceptions, of course, but generally this is not problematic. And we don't have time to show how German military doctrine from 1908 onwards, there was also concept of terrorists, etc., etc., etc. What is interesting also is to see that the majority of officers did not perceive them as Nazis. But on the issue of social inequality or racism, they were all sharing the values, practically all. The discussion of politics is extremely rare. Entpolitisierung is absolute. Not because they are afraid of something, but because they are taking some things for granted. And I think that almost everybody accepted the fact that the human society is marked by inequality. It is astonishing and depressing at the same time how quickly the Nazis' concept of racial superiority replaced the ideas and norms of the democratic pre-war period. And some also did not see a problem of taking things from killed Jews. I have to speed up a little because there are some very interesting passages here. So, Entpolitisierung means that one accepts attitude toward Jews, but not only Jews, also Tsigans, Slavs, Czechs, Poles, Russians, and of course Serbs, Slovenes, Croats, etc. You know from. There is a case which is very interesting just to tell you about. There are two officers which are decidedly anti-Nazis, decidedly anti-Decista, anti-Hitler, everything. They are rational, normal persons. But what they say at the end of this conversation is total agreement with the politics toward Jews. I am citing. But this thing with the Jews, this is okay. I find the racial problem, Rassenfrage, is not so bad in our system. So, for anybody acquainted barely with Freud, and this is the main interest why I went reading the transcripts, is to see how the ideology functioned at that time and how it still functions. In the discussion with Catherine Cocchio, we mentioned the problem with absurdity, impossibility, incoherency, etc. But this is the main point of ideology. Every ideology always functions with this problem. Even Claude Lefort, which is quite close to Hannah Arendt, I'm citing him, finds that the contradiction itself is the food of ideology. And interesting thing in this transcript is that you find a couple of lines later completely paradoxically different stance towards something. You'll see. So for the psychoanalysis, starting from Manoni's famous paper, I know, but it's not a surprise. So let me go further in the material. One of the myths is that the Holocaust and the killing of Jews was kept secret. Not really. The transcripts show that the majority of soldiers were familiar with the fate of the Jews. There is one case when somebody hears what's happening and he says, I don't want to be a German anymore. But generally, they know, they share stories. I'll read you one. So, they do know. Holocaust is generally mentioned peripherally, one can say, because there are only 300 pages of conversations. But these 300 pages show that everyone is familiar what is going on. And only later, in 1943, when Hitler started Operation 2005, they tried to eliminate the traces of the Holocaust. I'll read you what Major General Walter Bunz described in April 1945, what happened during a typical Jew operation he witnessed on the Eastern Front. The trenches were 24 meters long and about 3 meters wide. They, the Jews, had to lie down like sardines in a can with their heads toward in the middle. At the top, there were 6 marksmen with a gun, with submachine, who then shot them in the back of the neck. It was already full when I arrived, so the ones who were still alive had to lie on top, and they got shot. They had to lie there in neat layers so it wouldn't take up too much space. Before this happened, they had to turn in their valuables at another station. The edge of the forest was here, and there were 3 trenches on that Sunday. Here there was a line that stretched for over 1.5 kilometers long, and it was moving very slowly. So they had to wait in almost a mile line long to be killed. They were standing in line to be killed. When they got closer, they could see what was going on inside. They could hear, of course. Roughly, at this spot, they had to hand over their jewelry and their suitcases. A little farther along, they had to take off their clothes, all except their shirts and underpants. It was just women and little children, like 2-year-olds. And little children presented a problem for the marksmen because they couldn't be still, you know. They couldn't just wait to be shot. So there are problems which are discussed in these transcriptions because there were obviously some technical problems how to perform the job well. And there were some technical problems because of overexertion and the breakdowns of young SS men who worked, you know. This is labor. But what's shocking is that these were open killings. There was no attempt to keep it secret. And the authors give it the title Mitschießen, or to shoot with. Whole families were there. This was a social event. Little children, whole families were there, stood, watched. Everybody knew that this is going to happen. And this was during the day. Okay, there are then discussions, we should keep it secret and make it during the night. This is really bad, you know. And there's one case when a general says, yes, my officer tried to signal me not to go there for the practice, you know, but I went for that hill and later realized that he's in the middle of killing fields, you know, in the ashes and the remains of the kill. So local residents knew what is going on. And the discussion between soldiers is, this is unshame. It's not pretty. It's not really not pretty. And there are, of course, some who are very decisive, like Officer Benz. This is a dark spot in our history. To say that a Jew is a bearer basically only bad property is a Wahnsinn. It's crazy. And there is some other who said, I mentioned before, I don't want to be a German anymore. I have to speed up because I have only 10 minutes and we'll go like crazy. Okay. Pilots, war pilots, perceived their job as hunting. It's not a secret, you know, from computer games. And frequently they described their job as funny. Mordschpaß is the word which is repeated constantly. I'm just reading. That was fun. We really sprayed them. That was fun. That was really a fun. And I enjoyed it. You know, they're not seldom mentioning of this. So aesthetics of destruction from a pilot point of view is very interesting because pilot is in a safe place and he sees such huge fires. And somebody says, it's fun when you see the success of your work. Another one says, such a fire, such an explosion, I've never seen. So, and the other, which is interesting for your point of view when you were mentioning Fanon, pretend you are a cat, he felt sorry for horses he was seen blowing up, not for people, you know. So, there are no reasons for killing. Two officers engage in conversation. I shot a Frenchman from behind. He was riding a bicycle. At close range, yes. Did he want to take you prisoner? Nonsense. I wanted his bicycle. So, stories about rape are really horrifying. Partisan women were tortured with such bestiality that it is not possible to describe it. I'll just read one because it's interesting. Somebody says, in the first officers' prison camp where I was being kept there was a really stupid guy from Frankfurt, a young lieutenant, a young upstart. There were 8 of us sitting around the table and talking about Russia. And he said, oh, we caught this female spy who had been running around in the neighborhood. First, we hit her in the tits with a stick, and then we beat her rear with a bare bayonet. Then we fucked her, and then we threw her outside and shot at her. When she was lying there on her back, we threw grenades at her. Every time one of them landed near her body, she screamed. And just think, there were 8 German officers. This officer is telling the story, and just think, there were 8 German officers sitting around at the table with me, and they all broke laughing. I couldn't stand it anymore, so I got up and said, gentlemen, this is too much. So you can see clearly that there are different, very different perspectives. Just a short remark about, I think, is the most interesting, and this is how social bond functions. The system is bad, the Führer is good. This is the basic propositions. Everybody is criticized. Goebbels is swine, etc., etc. Let's start with a joke from General von Breuch in July 43. What's the difference between Christ and Hitler? In the case of Christ, one has died instead of all. Faith in Hitler, Führerglaube, is one of the leading blocks of the ruling Nazi ideology. And at the end of March, 2 pilots were taken prisoners. And the discussion is quite a couple of days later. And this discussion is very telltale. The first one says, one can think about National Socialism whatever one wants, but Adolf Hitler is the leader and has so far brought the German people a lot, uncanny a lot, unheimliche gut. At the end, one can again be proud on proper people, das Volk. This must never be forgotten. And the other says, nothing can be denied. But I am also convinced that Hitler is going to be the grave digger of German Reich. The grave digger, yes, he is, undoubtedly. So you have this pure paradox. At the same time, one is Messiah and the grave digger. This is the end of the war. I'm going to finish quickly. So, the Hitler, as you know, is the object of love. Everybody is talking about his magic eyes, and they are not consistent. Somebody says they are brown, somebody says they are blue, somebody says, you know. And the thing I was really shocked, and this I had to read it in a very short period, is a description of encounter with Hitler in love from a General Kruger. Before that, I'm going to read something that an officer in a discussion, there are 2 officers, Ludwig and Jung, and they are discussing the war on East and Russian power. And somebody is just dreaming about how they are going to win, etc., and the other responds, this is your pure wishful thinking. It's not a question anymore who's going to win on the terrain, but who will be the moral winner. If the Russians think that we are weak, they are wrong. Do not forget what a fantastic skull Hitler has. What a fantastic Schädel. You know all this passage from Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, you know, Schädellehre, skull, etc. And the passage I'm going to read, and then I'm going to close down because I'm really too long, is about how General Ludwig Kruger is describing to his fellow officers his close meeting with Hitler. The beginning of his talk is simply an explanation why, in his opinion, Hitler is successful. And then comes a sudden reversal. It is my opinion that the major part of the success of a party leader, and by the leader also, lies in pure suggestive massive action. This is part of hypnosis. And this hypnosis he has upon many people. I personally know many people who are very, very smart, smarter than him, but fall upon his spell. But I think that this responsibility that this man carries, this is superhuman. What he has told me about Africa, that struck me, but I can't say what it was. But what eye catches are his hands, beautifully wonderful hands. You can't see it on photographs. He has hands like an artist. I look him always directly in hands, beautiful, wonderful hands, which are not ordinary hands. These are sophisticated hands. Thank you.